So I've asked Ben Lal, who's our head of infrastructure, to come online. And the big question I've had is we've got all this data, all these databases, all this information stuck in CRM, stuck in our company's databases. In order to get it out, we've had to talk to an analyst. And I love my analysts, but analysts are always busy. They got a million things that they're doing. So if I want to just ask any question, even a simple question, it could take like, okay, it's bad if JP, the CEO of the company, is asking a question. They're probably going to get on a little bit quicker. But if you've got other team members in your company and they're going to ask a sophisticated or even not sophisticated question that requires you to get access to all the data of the company, I mean, it is a process. It could take like 2 weeks based on a normal, sprint schedule and development schedule to get any answer out of there. So I started working with Ben on this project. Ben, how long has it been? Maybe like 9 months, less than 6 months, probably summertime, give or take. And we've been trying, Ben like kind of leads all the data infrastructure, cybersecurity of the company. And so that was kind of the genesis. I was like getting frustrated trying to get basic information. And we've been able to honestly transform the whole company because of kind of this approach. So Ben, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, this is an area that I'm extremely passionate on, so please keep me honest with time because I tend to go on. I'm going to share my screen. So, what I want to demonstrate, I'm actually going to demonstrate two different platforms today. One, what we're already working in, Relevance AI, and also another platform called Hex, Hex.tech. And what we're going to work on actually building out and demoing is something called a data agent. And as JP said, the purpose of a data agent is to actually access our data repositories, um, wherever they may be, in a way that these agents are able to communicate, and you can actually ask real world questions about your business and get real world answers back. So what is a data agent? There's kind of 5 parts to a data agent. You have like the input, whatever the user question is. It could be a trigger. You have the context, which in the case of a data agent is the data sources, tables, documents. In this case, we're going to be actually looking at databases. But you have logic, which is the transformations. So that's filters, usually through prompts. You're transforming the data however you want it. Then you have your LLM model call, and then finally the output. What are you going to get out of it? You're going to get a table. Are you going to get a graph, a decision? It's coming straight from your data agent. So we're back in relevance. I'm going to elaborate on just a few different areas that's kind of needed for a data engine, a data agent. First off, tools, as we mentioned, there's tools for just about everything, but that becomes extremely important to kind of know ahead of time when it comes to building a relevance agent. I'm going to go ahead and click on tools, and we can kind of see out here all the different tools that are out there. There's literally 1,000+ different tools. It's important to know the data that you're connecting to and where it's coming from. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of, Microsoft SQL Server or, Postgres SQL or the specific database, MySQL. They have a lot of different databases out there that you could be storing company critical data. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick search, and you can see with SQL, they've got a lot of different options to execute SQL across your agent. And, there's a couple that I've created myself. This is one to execute SQL over a REST endpoint, which we'll be using today. And that's because our data that live for Hive, a lot of it lives in Microsoft Fabric, which is where our lake houses are. It's an analytics platform where we do all of our data transformations. And so we'll be using this. And then the next piece is, of course, the context, which is the data sources, tables, and documents. And that's where knowledge comes into play. And just for our demo today, I created a knowledge table, which you can do. You can create a blank table. And what you end up with is something that looks like this. This is essentially a what they call a data model. So if any of your organizations use other platforms, whether it's Fabric, Snowflake, usually you have this kind of metadata layer, and we can get into what that means, but we have this metadata layer that sits on top of your data that gives good documentation, describes the fields, the columns, what kind of, column type it is. So if I click on one of these, you can kind of see what it looks like. This is one of our loan performance tables, and I'm not going to go into all of this in detail, but you can see it's got a lot of um, table descriptions, and this is what they call a data model for a specific table. This is kind of step one. And then if we scroll down, you'll see we have a table, a column that's loan ID, and this is the unique identifier of the loan. We have a column that is a number of days since created, days since the loan creation, calculation as current date. So it's just basically instructions for a specific table that may exist in a database. So I've created this little knowledge table, this Hive semantic data, and that kind of has these three different tables in their loan performance, loan dates, and repayment details. And we'll be using that when we create an agent, which we'll just kind of jump right over here. So we're going to go to agents, and I'm going to do a new agent. Um, I could go ahead and type in a really big prompt here and have it create an agent. For data agents, I find it, at least with relevance, it's easier to just kind of start with a blank canvas so it doesn't get anything. Kind of like you saw before, we have a blank agent canvas talking about our models. And as JP mentioned, there are different models that are good at a lot of different things. And I'll be honest, there's not a lot that I would consider ChatGPT as the number one agent to use. But in my case, Microsoft SQL and generating SQL, in my experience, has been great with GPT-5. So I'm going to use GPT 5.2 for our model and kind of assign that ahead of time. I'm also going to go over to tools. And before we do anything, I'm going to go ahead and kind of lay some ground rules by adding the specific tools that I want. So there's not a lot of guessing. So I'm going to, that SQL agent, I'm going to go ahead and add it. That's our execute SQL query over REST endpoint. We're going to add that as a tool. And then I'm going to go to our knowledge, and I'm going to also add, I'll add an existing knowledge, and I'm going to use our Hive semantic data. Um, so when you add knowledge and relevance, you can choose to add all to the prompt. And what that means is all that data documentation with every single question. And I wouldn't recommend this for data documentation because you could come up with thousands and thousands of lines. This would pass that everything into every single question that you ask into the LLM. The other option is allow agent to search, and this is generally the better option, and it's going to search for relevant information in your documentation and use that at point in time. So we'll allow the agent to search. All right. So now we have kind of some ground rules for this agent. And just like we did before, we're going to create this agent with AI, and I'm going to ask it, I'll just give it a specific, I want to create a data agent that I can ask, can ask questions about my data stored in my lake house. Please use my custom execute SQL query over REST endpoint tool to execute relevant queries. And then I'm going to add something about my data knowledge so it knows. So I'll say data documentation for each field is listed in Hive semantic data knowledge table and should be referenced to determine what tables and fields need to be queried. So I'm going to go ahead and start with that. We'll hit enter. So I pre-assigned my tool that's going to be used to execute SQL. And then I've also pre-assigned my my data models. While that's running, I'm going to let me get into this just a little bit. And we're going to be looking at two different platforms, Hex and this one. And I'll kind of give you a little bit of a comparison between the two and what they're great at. But something that JP hinted on about reusability of of your context and reusability, especially when it comes to these agents across multiple platforms, um, is extremely smart. So, it's hard to know if Hex or if Relevance AI is going to be the platform in the next 6 months that everyone's going to be using to do these kinds of activities and agents and workflows. Um, so you want to make sure that when you're building these agents and you're building your context and your data models, you're doing it in a way that's platform agnostic. Um, One thing that I like to do, and one thing that when you get a look at Hex, you'll kind of understand a little bit more is when it comes to data, the data in data models are generally stored in a very um, standardized format. They're they're YAML files, they're MD files, that are very specific to tables, and a lot of them have a very standard format, and they're used in a lot of other platforms. So, for instance, Snowflake, when you have your data built out in Snowflake and you're doing your analysis from it, you have these data models that you can export from whatever platform you're using and reuse a lot of that same stuff that you've used elsewhere. And these agents a lot of times are able to make use of things you've already done without um, rebuilding things from scratch. So making sure that your agent is built with reusable pieces of information um, can be extremely helpful. So let's see um, that looks like it's added my tools. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to skip this, and it does go through and it will make recommendations for tools just like you saw with JP. I don't necessarily when you start working with the platform, you kinda learn what you actually need and what you don't. Um, so I'm going to remove a tool that I know is not gonna work as good for me. They have a way that it can use, I don't know if you guys have talked about RAG before. It's a RAG, retrieval augmented searching, across your data table. For what we're doing now, it's not really necessary. So I'm going to just delete that. So it's going to use the Hive semantic data table for relevant schema information. And because it's added in knowledge here and as a search tool, it's going to automatically go ahead and do that kind of searching and querying for. So let's go ahead and hit continue, or we can actually skip that. Hold on.
Ben, let's skip ahead to kind of
Yep.
like using the agent. Probably 70% of what he said may have gone over your head. I think the big thing though is understanding that now you can kind of animate and give life to all of the data that's very static. So whether it's accounting data, it's good to have all the standardized reports. It's good to have all the standardized reports in a CRM. It's good to have all these standardized reports. But the reality is, you want to ask questions across your organization. And that's where the power of kind of like enabling the data becomes incredibly powerful. And we're now able to just do things that were just physically not possible in timeframes that are pretty outstanding. And like I said, not a lot of the. I mean, for our company, it hasn't existed more than what 90 days, Ben? Maybe like a little bit longer, not quite. So the stuff is moving pretty quick. And I know what Ben is showing is actually pretty sophisticated. Well, what I can tell you is from 3 months ago to the end of this year, this process becomes, you know, 4 times easier, at least. And you just couldn't do this stuff 6 months ago or a year ago. So it's getting better and easier all the time. The key is I always say to my analysts and team is understand the problem and the question. Don't worry about the answer. What I mean by that is just because you don't know how all the tools and all the systems work from that standpoint, it's getting easier and easier to just ask the question and the tools will actually walk you through step by step how to set it up, which is also why I use Comment all the time. I don't know how to use all these tools. I don't know how to set up SQL Server and connect all the data to all these different things and how to get all these definitions. But It is progressing so fast that you'll be able to do a lot of this a lot easier. Worst case scenario, you just upload an Excel file and have definitions to the Excel file that you have, which I do a lot of. But Ben, why don't we show these outputs of the questions you've asked?
Yeah, so I just did a quick one, really, just show it's actually connected to our system. It's used. This is actually real data that it's gone out and like hit a lake house, and it's returning a result all within seconds. I mean, it's generally pretty quick. And while this is a basic question from this platform, you can start asking a lot more in-depth questions. One other thing I want to show, um, one thing with Hex is something called workforces. And I don't know if you guys have talked about agentic flow, but if I go to workforce, um, this is where you can actually start chaining together different agents that you build. So this is one of the agents that we built, this lakehouse generator. That's kind of a more complex version of what I just showed you, and it generates SQL queries. It audits it in a kind of a recursive function to try and make sure that you have like accurate information coming back, because part of this is, can you trust the data that's actually coming back? And that's something that these agentic flows can work to solve. So this, again, generates a SQL query. We have an auditor that will go through. And if you look at the actual context here, it's basically you're an auditor. You're going to evaluate this query that's been generated, and based on all of our business context and everything, is this a valid query? If not, it's going to fail. If it succeeds, it's going to execute that query and return you the whatever you're looking for. And it just kind of naturally loops through until it gets it right. And that's just like a high level example of a agentic flow here in um, uh, relevance. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and jump over to Hex. So what relevance is really good at is building these agents and agentic flows that are very specifically tuned. Hex is a different platform. Um, Hex, it's Hex, yeah, Hex.tech, and what this is it's an analytics platform based off of AI, and it's connected to all of your data in the same way that you can connect an agent to there, but it basically lets you go through and ask and deep dive into some very hard problems that you may have from a data perspective, and trying to get some more information out. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll open up a example. So this is one that we ran right before this call. I'm not gonna go through it because, like JP said, some of these, requests can take some time, especially if it's kind of a complex question. So, we're in the lending industry. So I asked our Hex agent, I've noticed that our overall signing rate for one of our portfolios has increased from November to December, and I would like to know why. Is there a specific underwriting strategy that is the cause? Are we shifting more deployment to a specific strategy? And it goes through and it thinks about it. And 2 minutes later, we get a deep analysis on all of this information. And it shows that, yeah, we've increased our deployment to a specific strategy by 25 points and decreased it from another. And you can kind of see these different strategies. It'll build out graphs for you. You can turn around and ask it for different types of graphs, and it can show it in a different way. Um, but this kind of analysis would normally take us, it could take us a week depending on, sprint cycles and, availability of an analyst to do the deep dive. But this, came out and it's, pretty straightforward within 2 minutes. And from there, we'll validate it, et cetera. But this kind of analytics platform is super useful because it lets you kind of go through and ask questions in a kind of a bit by bit flow. I'll just show you really quick under data. So I am kind of talking about data here. So the biggest benefit to Hex is it works with a lot of different data platforms. So if you're signed up and starting from the beginning, I can add a data connection, and these are all the different types of data that we can connect to. And it takes all the data models that exist out there. It'll scan all of your data, and it really makes it quick and easy to integrate everything kind of with one button click, and then you can obviously enrich the data and do different things to make it
Hey, Ben,
cleaner. Yeah.
to kind of close out, data is fun and you can get a lot of really good value out of it if you can ask the right questions. Security is always at top of the mind in a lot of our conversations here. Um, so walk us through, I mean, you're also helping with leading and working with our head of cybersecurity. Walk us through kind of like how to think about data and security. We want everybody to play with these tools. We want people to be empowered to use this, but how do we kind of manage the security conversation of a lot of data that we have in the company and making sure like somebody just doesn't download it and steal the data?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's definitely a concern across, not just our organization. It's kind of everywhere because, these um, AI models can, you know, no one really has that much of a clue as to like what can happen when you're connecting in like real data, especially if it's PII data, identifiable data that no one, 100% radioactive. We've had to be very careful and make sure that the data that we're connecting to these agents is not accessible by everyone. And then also, we're very selective with the data that we're currently sticking out there. They have different tools. Hex, for instance, has something called an observability API, which really, when it's connected to your data, it helps you not only kinda see what's, happening with the model, but also from, like, a compliance side, make sure that nothing's going on and no one you can see the prompts that are actually coming through and kinda nip things in the butt as they happen. If it detects someone's, you know, pasting in Social Security numbers into the model, that kinda thing. They have a lot of different tools out there that are kinda set to help with cybersecurity, so we are kinda still investigating, but I would say number 1, for the time being, be very selective with the data that's going out there. Um, again, I would treat PII data specifically. If it's not an internally ran model, you don't want to be passing that directly into Gemini or any of these publicly facing models, even if they're in your own enterprise account. Um, it's just too new of a, security area to 100% trust everything that you're seeing.
One of the things that it sounds dumb in kind of this process, but probably very valuable to everybody who's on the call is start manual. I mean, pull the data out of your system, put it in an Excel file or a CSV, upload it in a tool like Hacks and play with the data there rather than connecting everything day one. Because the thing is, like, with all this stuff, we've been very careful and progressive. One, is it worth it? We also, and I talked to a YPO forum in California, and we have an AI task force internal to the company where we're meeting periodically, setting the standards. We get to play with all the different toys. And if we're going to release it, we have these conversations around security. What are best practices? How do you carefully onboard team members onto these different tools? And then the whole process is you're constantly playing with the tool. You're constantly testing what are the limits. The other thing that Ben talked about is an auditor. Everything you do, in my opinion, make sure you have another agent that's an auditor. It's the easiest thing to help make sure you're not going to screw up, which is spending the extra time. Like we have a compliance AI agent. Literally all the messages that are being sent out, texts, emails, all these different things, just audits. Worst case scenario, it doesn't mean that the auditor tells you what to do and not to do, but at least it can catch stuff. And the more that you create this like auditing kind of mindset, before problems end up happening and you're making decisions off of this data, I always say just assume it's wrong. Like every time I do a query on Hex or any of these tools, I'm going to assume it's wrong. I'm going to take the output and all that all the SQL that I don't know, copy it, paste it, send it to Ben, send it to one of the analysts just to double validate what's, especially if we're going to make decisions off this. I don't know if it's right or wrong. And it might be right, but even Ben, whenever we were playing around with these tools early on, it was spitting out information that was not correct. And then we had to go through the tooling process to figure out, kind of like he showed, creating an auditor, checking that it's done correctly, all those kind of components. So, buyer beware. It's not going to work the way you expect it to. I mean, internal company policy is anything that gets launched, assume it's broken for 90 days. And then do side by side comparisons manually. Just because once you start jumping in, it feels so good to be able to have access to everything in your entire company instantaneously. You kind of feel like a superhero honestly, like the questions you can ask are outstanding. But then you're like, assuming that it's all correct. And I would highly recommend not taking that assumption and then slowing down the process to have kind of the audits and checks before the decision is made. Hey, even McKinsey has done the classic stupid move where they published huge reports in the UK. I think I wrote a paper about it by junior consultants, published all the information, all this data, everything. It had come up with hallucinated citations and references, things that never existed, quotes from people that had never been said. It was a huge scandal. And that's McKinsey. I mean, like, they're supposed to be quote unquote super high integrity, super high quality. But if it can happen to McKinsey, think about everybody else, right? Even law firms have gotten in trouble now where they're doing legal briefs and analysis by AI agents, again, with case law that didn't exist. Like literally, it was referencing cases that had happened in the United States in specific districts that had never happened. So my opinion, assume it's not working, assume it's incorrect, and have either auditors or third parties or team members that can audit a lot of these outputs, especially if it's critical decision path from that standpoint.